I'm so excited today that I get to introduce my really good friend and keto coach, Mary Beauchamp. I want to welcome you all and thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to get into this presentation because I have a very personal connection to Mary, which I will reveal as we go along. But I know you're going to get a lot out of her talk today, and that she will really speak to where you're at with regards to your own regimen and diet. And I know she's going to surprise and delight you. So Mary Beauchamp is a registered nurse and a certified GAPS practitioner. And so that's gut and psychology syndrome approach. Yoga instructor and natural childbirth educator. She is passionate about helping people achieve their metabolic health so that they can prevent, control, and reverse chronic diseases. They can get off prescription medication, reach their ideal body weight, and live their very best life. Mary's been helping people get keto adapted for over 25 years and has worked with some of the top doctors in the field of therapeutic nutritional ketosis. Mary grew up on a farm, and she is passionate about science of human nutrition, preserving traditional food systems, and the restoration of land through regenerative agriculture. And Mary spent 12 years as a natural childbirth educator and doula, and she believes that good nutrition should begin in the womb. All right. Jeff, I'm going to have you actually just give us a little overview about where Mary's approach to diet and regimen fits in so that our patients have a bit of context. And then we're going to hand the whole talk right over to Mary.
Yes. Yeah, and that's excellent, as you're saying, Alison, to put it into the Heilkunst context. Well, for one, the people watching generally are connected to us and have some sense of the Heilkunst framework and how we approach health and how we think about it. But even more specifically for today, so we're really clear on where are we on the health map? What are we talking about? And why is someone like a specialist like Mary so important to us in Heilkunst? Like, how does it really flesh out the whole picture for us, right? So let me just bring up. I have a little slide here, and I used this in a recent presentation we did. I just thought this slide is pretty universal, so I'll probably bring it with me everywhere I talk from now on. But the basic idea here, I won't take very long on this, but it's the basic idea is that in the system of Heilkunst, we're really working through what I call, or what is called, a rational approach to medicine. And rational is kind of a philosophical word in the way I'm using it, as opposed to empirical medicine, right? So you can walk not 10 feet out your front door probably and find some form of empirical something in the world. People are going around living their lives empirically, doing their healthcare empirically, and all that means there's nothing bad about that in itself, but it just means to learn by experience. And we take in some data, and we come to a conclusion about that. Oh, when I did this, then this happened. That's all fine as far as most everyday living. But when we get more into the scientific context in medicine, we want to be more scientific and more precise, and back to my word, more rational about how we are getting certain results. So another way of saying all of that is what I don't like seeing in healthcare, and I strive to overcome this as far as how we approach things, is when people are in that purely empirical mode, they mistake the disappearance of a symptom as necessarily a good thing. Sometimes a symptom can disappear because it's been suppressed, and that's not good. So we don't want suppression. We don't want palliation, except when we get into actual palliative care. But what we do want is actual cure. So that's essentially what this slide is all about. We have the three basic jurisdictions, or the principles, within Heilkunst, and I say within Heilkunst, but really what I should say is within all of healthcare. This isn't just a special way that we think in Heilkunst. This should be the way that all healthcare organizes itself. That if I had one mission in this life, it would be to transform the entire healthcare system, allopathic and natural, and everyone, that this really becomes day one of everyone's healthcare education, right? Whether they're in surgery school or massage practice school or anything, starting with this as the rational foundation, I think could really move the entire healthcare system forward in light years, as it were. So the last thing I'll say, just the content of this slide, these three jurisdictions, Therapeutic Regimen, Therapeutic Medicine, and Therapeutic Education, they're each unique. They're each operating on their own principle, and you can only apply each one at the right time and place. So the analogy I always use is, you cannot take, like, if we're talking about the human legal system, you can't take if you got a parking ticket somewhere, you can't take that to the wrong court. You can't take that to family court or to whatever the other types of courts are. I'm not thinking at the moment, but you have to bring your parking ticket to traffic court. Like, that's the only jurisdiction that can do anything about your traffic ticket. So with that analogy in mind, you can only solve regimen issues, the first jurisdiction, when you have an actual imbalance. Somebody has a nutritional imbalance, they're doing not enough exercise, or they're doing too much or too little of whatever the necessities of life are, and they end up in an imbalance. So that's the jurisdiction of regimen. The middle jurisdiction of medicine is specifically homeopathic medicine. So that's where we get into the law of similars, or like cures like, and where we get into treatment of actual disease. In this jurisdiction, there's a whole range of diseases. That's kind of a longer technical discussion, but just so you know, this is different from the first thing I said, from imbalance. So this is not just a matter of someone is lacking vitamin C or something like that. This is, when we're talking about a disease, it's an actual qualitative pathological change to someone's whole functioning, which now we need a different jurisdiction to deal with. So those of us who are familiar with Heilkunst treatments, this includes all the shocks and traumas on someone's timeline. Somebody has had some kind of, let's say, exposure to lead. Let's say there was leads in their house plumbing or something like that, and they've had this long-term exposure to lead. Well, now that becomes a qualitative disturbance to their whole living function. So now we use the law of similars to remove that lead disease from their system. So that's enough of an outline for that. And the final one, the therapeutic education, is kind of the most vast area of all three of them, and it's kind of where all the other problems come from in the first place. But the therapeutic education, where the first jurisdiction is about balance, as I said, the second jurisdiction is about disease or curing of disease. This third jurisdiction, this very vast jurisdiction, is really about the broad area of truth versus ignorance. Now that's kind of a red flag for a lot of people, even to say that phrase. Well, what is truth, and who's truth, and who are you to tell me what's true, and all these kinds of objections that people have when they hear that idea. But fundamentally, there is there are things which are true, and there are things which are false. That has nothing to do with our subjective relationship to that. Doesn't matter, if I think that pink elephants could fly, or some crazy thing, it doesn't make it true, right? So just anyway, the third area is such a broad and vast area, but I'll more or less leave it at that. With maybe I'll say one last thing, which is this idea of truth. Yes, there's a cognitive side to truth, the actual act of knowing things, in our mind, but there's also the bodily or physical aspect of truth. Like, our body kind of holds on to a lie. Like, let's say we were raised, the way our parents raised us, they kind of, one way or another, they gave us certain false ideas about ourselves. Oh, you're dumb, you're lazy, you're, whatever messages we absorb, even if it's subconscious, the parents didn't even know they were giving that message. That untruth now becomes a source of disease later on in life. That's a basic example, but I'll kind of leave the third jurisdiction at that. And I'll take my slide down, put it back in my pocket, and I'll pass it back to you, or Allison and Mary.
All right, Mary, take a moment. If you can bring your slides presentation back up, love. And that'll push us.
Oh, yes, I have to press that button. Yes.
I just want to actually let people know that on the right-hand side of your screen, you can actually put comments, questions in. We're super excited to field those as at the end of the presentation. Mary will take some time in order to address those. So please don't hesitate. Love to hear from you and engage and interact.
Okay, so Mary, do you have the slides up accessible on your screen?
I do see it, yes. Thank you. Okay. Are you guys complete?
We're good. You go
Okay.
for it. You have the stage, madam.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today. You two, you're just so special to me, and I've learned so much from you, and I hope we've learned a lot from each other. And I just really honor our connection and relationship. So thank you again for inviting me today. I'm very excited to be here and be speaking to your tribe today. So yeah, I just want to start out by saying thank you, Jeff, for sharing that really vital piece, that there's different ways in which we come to be where we are. And in my book, Radical Health Makeover, I attempt to give the backstory on sort of how we arrived where we are so that people will understand how they got sick in the first place. And unfortunately, our inputs that we're getting from a very young age, like from the time we're born, are not necessarily optimal or true or factual or healthy or any of that. So as we age and we grow and we start to have, symptoms show up where maybe our health is declining, oftentimes we start to go and search for answers. And what we have to do is be able to discern what is truth and fiction and what is real and what is not. And that is sometimes a very confusing path for many people to go down. So one of the things that is so important that we understand is that our belief system, which is ingrained from the time we're very, very young, as this slide says, I don't know if you can see this slide, but it says the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. Whoops. So Bruce Lipton is a favorite doctor of mine, and he's sort of the father of epigenetics, if you will. And so epigenetics was really one of his discoveries in the lab was that a cell doesn't necessarily become what the genetic material is telling it to do. So it depends on the environment of the cell. So what we want to do is really look at the environment. If we're an organism in the world at large, everything coming in from the environment is affecting our physiology. And our cells are no different. Our cells are just a small microcosm of that giant mirror of our whole body and millions and trillions of cells in the world. Each cell that we have is affected by its environment. And so whatever is going on physiologically is basically informing that cell how to behave. And we used to think that we were just a victim, if you will, of our genetic material. So if you have a genetic miasm, as you guys call it, or a SNP, or it's part of our genetic code that is maybe malfunctioning or not healthy. It's maybe going to tell our cells to produce a tumor or something else that's unwanted, right? So our cells can get programmed, but it's based on our environment. So the environment that we choose to put ourselves in has a lot to do with our mind, because we can control some things in our environment, right? So once we realize how much control we do have over not only our cellular environment, but our external environment, we can influence our biochemistry in a very profound way. So my work is really to inform or empower people to understand that they do have control over a lot of how their cells express themselves and how their genes show up in their body, right? So there's a lot that we can do to change the manifestation of our genetic code, right? So we're not just simply a victim of our DNA, right? We do have a way, many ways, that many things that we can do that will change the outcome of our genes. So one of the things to just start with is that our very thoughts that we think impact our physiology. So for example, if you think about something that gives you, makes you sad, if you remember, if you just think about something in your past that made you sad, a relative that died, the human condition, if you will, the amount of poverty and suffering, those types of things bring about a feeling of maybe sadness for some people, maybe a little bit of anxiety. And those thoughts about whatever it is you're remembering actually are impacting your emotions. And those emotions are communicating to every cell in your body at every moment, right? So everything is sort of coming from the top down. And a lot of the things that have come from the top down, mainly from the media, from our parents, from, the media pretty much sums up a lot of things, but have impacted us in a way that our subconscious holds all of that energy. So we can learn how to redirect that energy so that we're actually communicating to our body that it's okay to heal itself. And one of the things that's so important is that we learn to communicate messages to our body that allows our nervous system to relax so that our body can heal itself. So doctors, we've sort of been told since the beginning of time that, doctors are here to heal us and to fix us. And sometimes they do in emergency situations, I would say. But for most people today, we're dealing with issues that are not emergency situations. And we are still holding this belief that a doctor is going to fix us. And unfortunately, what we know is that doctors don't necessarily fix us, but they give our body the tools that it needs to fix itself. And today we've come to rely on the pharmaceutical industry on a lot of pills and treatments and procedures and surgeries and things like that can potentially heal us. However, many people are not experiencing healing from those modalities. So if you're one of those people that has run into a roadblock with your health or, a health challenge that has not been able to be remedied with modern medicine, you're not alone. And I want you to know that it's not your fault. That's the main thing, is that it is not your fault, because we've all been programmed. Everybody is having to look at what their belief system is about how their body heals so that they can take on their own self-healing. Does that make sense? Okay. So carrying on with that theme, it's first to realize that our mind is holding a lot of this material that needs to really be looked at. And so we get to then consciously determine, are we going to be unconsciously led down a rabbit hole into the black hole, if you will, or can we learn to consciously create new thoughts and new beliefs that can actually reprogram our entire immune system so that our body can heal itself, right? So that's really what I'm interested in. That's what really excites me, is to help people know how to do this. And so again, it starts with looking at our belief systems and seeing that it all starts in our mind with what we want to change as far as our inputs, okay? So we all know that from a young age, we are a sponge absorbing everything that happens to us in our environment. And not all of our environments were very healthy, right? So not only do we absorb unhealthy and complicated things from our parents and our family, but also from the world and the environment and the media and all the things. So over this period of time, we have a lot of information coming in, and we have no way to filter out that which is useful and that which is not until we're adults, right? So here we are trying to navigate through this sea of stuff. And yeah, so let's see what's next here. So one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So that's really what I want to impart on everybody, is that we all have parts of ourselves that we cannot see. They are invisible to us. And the only way to learn about ourselves is to go inward and have an awareness of what is actually happening with our thought process, right? So this can start with meditation or quiet, breathing, whatever you want to call it. But it's really a way of separating yourself from your thoughts so that you can see what is you and what is not, right? So as we begin these practices, which I outline in my book, we can start to really learn what our body is communicating to us. And then at some point, you're able to actually intervene. And with practice, you can actually change the course of where your thoughts are taking you. And therefore, you can change the course of what is going on in your physiology. So I just want to express that it's so important to realize that we are a product of all of this information that has come through medicine, basically the medical, the medical machine, if you will, modern medicine, or also the government guidelines, the food guidelines, the food pyramid, all the media, all the government is all owned by big pharma. Okay, so everything that we have been programmed to believe from a young age stems from this mindset that is based on profit. Essentially, it is based on non-scientific evidence. Many of the recommendations that we see coming through, just to name the big one, the big elephant in the room, is the government guidelines for nutrition, right? So the government guidelines for what people should be eating that was put in place by our government to keep us healthy is actually doing the opposite. So if it's based on, if that information has come from big pharma, right, it's all based on profit. So we have to look at this is the root cause of why we have a global health epidemic right now of chronic illness. And now with the pandemic, we have, a whole nother epidemic and pandemic that we're dealing with, which is that of the viral infection. So way before that, way before any of this, the pandemic really just illuminated and sort of magnified, if you will, all the problems that were already going on in our systems for 100 years, right? So none of this is new. The pandemic just sort of like illuminated it, sort of lifted the veil off so we could all see, oh, these systems are crumbling. They don't work. They never have. And they're making people sick. Okay. So that's just what we have to understand when we are listening to anything that is part of this system that is on this slide. We are getting filled with information that is solely for the purpose of profit. Okay. And to separate ourselves from that is not easy. And what it requires is that we really re-educate ourselves about what is truth and what is fiction. Okay. And to do that effectively, we have to sort of wipe the slate clean. Like, what if I didn't know anything? If you just forgot everything you knew and everything you'd heard and everything you saw from your doctor, or, the commercials, the Pfizer commercials on all the, sporting events, and in every direction you look, pharma is pushing its agenda onto all of us. And so if we wipe that all clean and we just took that off the table, then we can sort of rebuild a new operating system in our brain, right? And then we can build a new operating system in our body. Okay. So let's see. Again, Bruce Lipton, one of my favorites. The fate of our cells is controlled by the chemistry of our blood, and the chemistry of our blood is adjusted by the way we perceive life. So your perception of reality, my perception of reality, is what is controlling our physiology, essentially. So what do we want to do about that, right? So we're all made of the elements, right? We are made of the earth, the elements, and we are completely reliant upon the elements to regain our health, okay? So we need the sunlight, we need the fresh air, we need the food, the proper food and the proper air, right? So these four elements are paramount, and reconnecting to the elements of the earth and the air and the clean water and the sunlight is really what the body needs to heal and thrive, okay? And we've been so separated from the external, natural world that many of us have become very ill because of it. Okay, so the pathway back to self-healing and reclaiming our health is to connect with the elements and to understand that we can change this course by first changing the mind. Okay. So again, there's the elements so important for healing. And yeah, so the perfect storm for a health crisis is really when we have these inputs coming in from the world, environmental stressors. We have, poor quality water. We're drinking chemicals in our city water supply, things coming in from our diet, and then emotional stress, right? So all these things sort of add up to the perfect storm. And that's usually when we see a health crisis. I rarely see a person that has a health crisis that was not rooted in some type of emotional stressor or environmental stressor, okay? Or dietary stressor, long-term. So these are all triggers. If our genetics is the gun, it's the environment that pulls the trigger. Okay, so that's something that is really important to remember. That something has to pull the trigger for us to actually become ill. So when we think in terms of like the coronavirus, for example, people who are having the worst outcomes with this have already had a predisposition. They're already compromised in some way. They already have some low-level inflammation. They have metabolic dysfunction on some level. And when the virus comes along, that just triggers the immune system to basically go into an overproduction of an immune response that's out of balance, right? So that creates like a cytokine storm, which creates, all the respiratory issues associated with that. But not everybody's going to have that response, right? It just depends on how compromised your immune system is. And at the foundation of the immune system is our metabolic function. Okay, so that's when it gets into the dietary stressors. And so we have to look at how to change the inputs. We have to get rid of the toxic, environment. If we're in a toxic relationship, if we have trauma, we have to resolve these emotional baggage, if you will. We have to release and deal with some of this emotional and spiritual baggage that many of us hold, right, as a result of our life experience and our traumas. We also have to look at how are we going to change our diet to really impact a difference in our physiology. Okay. And then we have to remove ourselves from any kind of toxicity. We have to stop putting toxins in, right, in our mouth with our food and our water. And also if we're exposed to, toxic mold or any kind of heavy metals, we have to stop that exposure. So if that means moving across the country or moving out of a moldy house or whatever it is, we have to deal with all three of these to really see the biggest change. Okay. So yeah, Dr. Robert Miller is sort of the father of methyl-genetic nutrition. And he's the one that said that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. Okay. So where did we come from, right? So how did we get where we are and what went wrong, right? So we came from this place, 4.5 million years ago, the human evolutionary process. So we want to look at, and I like to look at where we came from evolutionarily. How is our body actually designed? What foods was our body designed to eat? And also the scientific literature. What does the scientific literature have to say about our human physiology, as well as history, anthropology, science. So we want to look at a lot of things. And also the largest human experiment that's ever been done on humans, which was over the last 100 years, which led to this very short window of time where we may have spent millions of years getting from the first ape to the guy with the sword, right? It didn't take very long at all to get from the upright man to the guy carrying the Coca-Cola who's obese, right? So that was a very, very short window of time in our history, in our evolutionary history. And so what happened in that 100 years? Or maybe 200, but it's not long, okay? And so what happened there is, I'll get into that a little bit later, but essentially something happened that drastically impacted our human health, and it happened at a metabolic level. Okay, so I'm all about the metabolism and how we can create a shift in our metabolism, because the root and the foundation of chronic disease is a metabolic dysfunction. Okay, and that is exactly what we're seeing with the pandemic, is that people who have the worst outcomes have metabolic dysfunction. Okay, this is what they call a comorbidity. So how can we change that? And we can. That's the good news. You can definitely change that. And it has to do with changing your diet, okay? And all of the other things, right? Starting with the beliefs, starting with the, is there anything in your environment that needs to be looked at? And then how can we really dive into the diet? So that's one of the things I help people do. It's really fine tune their diet so that they can bring their body into metabolic state of balance, which helps their hormones to come into balance and everything else to come into balance. Okay. So metabolic syndrome is something that is usually a group of symptoms. Okay. It could be extra body fat around the midsection of the belly. It could be pre-diabetes, so elevated blood sugars. It can be fatigue. It can be essentially what happens when we have metabolic syndrome is we have cardiovascular disease, we have chronic inflammation, we have blood sugar imbalances, and it all starts with an imbalance in the blood sugar, essentially a chronically elevated imbalance in the blood sugar, which is again why this is such a great little cartoon model here, because that guy's probably drinking a Coca-Cola. Okay. So what happens is all metabolic problems begin with this imbalance in the blood sugar to begin with, because we've all been taught to eat the wrong things. Okay. And this again came from all the places that we get information, right? So the bottom line is that what happens when we have chronically elevated glucose in our blood is that it transcribes into something called insulin resistance. And I don't want to get too heady about this, but insulin resistance is essentially at the core of every chronic illness, right? From dementia to Alzheimer's to diabetes to cancer. Okay. And the reason is because, well, I'll get into that in just a second. So when we have this overproduction of insulin over time, because our blood sugars are chronically elevated, our insulin in our body sort of becomes resistant, right? So our pancreas keeps pumping out insulin, but the cells are so stuffed with insulin or with glucose essentially that they're about to pop. So it's kind of like blowing up a balloon until it's just about to pop. And many of us have blood cells that are stuffed full of glucose, and the insulin is knocking at the door saying, open up, I have more glucose, and I need, I want to open the doorway for more glucose to get in the cell, but there's no room. The cells just become literally overstuffed with glucose. And at that point, it's called insulin resistance. And what that means is that the body just sort of ignores the signaling from insulin to do its job, which is to open the doorway to let more glucose into the cells. Okay, so that's all insulin resistance is. And with that, we have a whole host of other major metabolic issues that start to stem from that problem, okay? So as Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut, and I am a firm believer in that. So one of the things about our gut health is that the same things that destroy the metabolism also destroy our digestive tract. So the two kind of work together. So the metabolism is when you take food and it gets turned into energy, okay? And the little machines inside your cells that turn food into energy or nutrients into energy is partly your digestive tract breaking down the food into nutrients, but then the nutrients go into the cells into what's called the mitochondria, okay? So the mitochondria are sort of the energy machines inside our cells, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about the gut and the metabolism because they work together and they get sick together and they heal together. Okay. So if you have a leaky gut, you also have a leaky brain. Okay. You have leaky cell walls essentially everywhere. It's not just the gut, but the gut is sort of the epicenter of systemic inflammation, if you will. Okay. And this is not anything new, right? So Dr. Weston Price, he was a famous dentist who did lots and lots of research many years ago in the early 1900s. He was an amazing dentist. He changed really the face not only of dentistry, but also medicine, because what he discovered was that when he traveled the world looking at more indigenous traditional cultures, he realized that they had no dental issues. They had perfectly straight teeth. They were perfectly white. Their jaws were big enough to fit the teeth in without being crooked. But then the more he looked at more industrialized food cultures that had more westernized ways of eating. Their teeth were very crooked. They couldn't all fit in their mouth. Their jaws didn't develop correctly. I mean, the list just goes on. And from there, he noticed that these other more industrialized food populations had all kinds of health issues, right? So that he was pretty much identifying the genesis of degenerative disease 100 years ago. Okay, so again, this is not new information, but the information has not been widely available because we have been under this shroud of what the media wants us to know. And it's not how to prevent disease, okay? The media wants us to be sick so we can buy pharmaceuticals and make lots of money for the pharmaceutical industry, okay? So that's why this information is not widespread and seems like some revelational idea, but really it's not. Okay, so the roles of the gut flora, just to go back to what happens in our gut, is to protect our body from foreign invaders, right? So the integrity of your gut lining is sort of made like the cells are tightly woven together, kind of like a sweater. And when you eat the wrong food that inflames your gut, these cells sort of separate. And so it's like a loose sweater, and when you pull it apart, you can see holes through it, right? And so we call this leaky gut. Okay, and what happens when we eat food that inflame our digestive tract, and our gut gets leaky, and the cells separate a little bit, tiny little undigested food particles leak out through the spaces in between the cells, which are only one cell layer thick in the gut, which is very hard to believe. And so what happens is these little particles of undigested food get out into the bloodstream, and your immune system wants to get rid of them because they're not supposed to be in your bloodstream. They're very toxic. And so your immune system starts to get activated to get rid of them, okay? And if this happens once a year when you eat something, it's not that big of a deal. But when it's happening every meal, then every bite of food you eat becomes like a river of toxins, okay? So no matter how much organic, healthy, whole foods you eat, if you have a leaky gut, it is like a river of toxicity going into your bloodstream with every bite you take, okay? So the gut flora consists of 90% of all the genetic material in the body, which is really hard to believe, but there's far more bacteria in the gut than there is cells in the human body, okay? So we're mostly made of bacteria. We're mostly made of an organism, if you will, that has its own agenda. So there's basically three types of bacteria. There's the pathogenic, the beneficials, and the opportunistic. So the pathogenic are the ones that make you sick and are unhealthy, and the parasites and the flukes and the candida and all the more pathogenic bacteria. And the beneficial bacteria are the ones that are the good bacteria, and they kind of keep each other in balance. So that's a good thing. Everybody wants their gut flora to balance itself out. And then there's the opportunistic, which sort of go back and forth. So it's a general way to put it, but they can become pathogenic or they can become beneficial. It just depends on the environment inside of your gut. So these things all keep each other in balance. And when we feed the pathogenic bacteria, which we are doing when we eat according to the dietary guidelines put in place by our government, we're feeding the pathogenic bacteria, okay? Because they love sugar, they love carbohydrates. And that is essentially what we've been taught to eat with the food pyramid, right? Mostly the grains, the breads, the cereals, the pastas, and the, potatoes and all those sort of things. So that's what feeds the pathogenic bacteria. And it also feeds cancer cells, right? So carbohydrates, glucose, all carbohydrates turn to glucose, and glucose essentially is what cancer cells love, right? So the pathogens in the body, all viruses, all bacteria, and all cancer cells love glucose, okay? They love carbohydrates. And that should give you a good idea as to why so many people are struggling with these things. And again, excess glucose, well, I'll get into that in just a second. But so here's what a healthy gut lining looks like. It looks like little fingers. Your gut is lined with these little fingers called microvilli and villi. And they're like little hairs. So there's a lot of surface area. If you're to pull that apart, you'd have like I want to say it was a tennis court or something, lined with just your intestinal lining, because it's all very convoluted, okay? So we have these finger-like protrusions all throughout the gut, okay? And their main job is to produce mucus, to break down food, and to absorb it into the bloodstream, the nutrients, okay? So here's what a sick little enterocyte looks like with the scraggly hair, right? So they're when the new cell is produced, it's very vibrant. It has this wavy hair-like cilia on that actually collects nutrients and brings it into the bloodstream, right? But when they get old and kind of sick, they look like this one, and then they usually slough off of the intestinal tract and they get eliminated, right? But if you don't have very many healthy ones and you have a lot of these sick ones, your gut it just can't function. You can't get the nutrients in. You become malnourished, and then that even compromises the immune system even more. Okay, so what happens with this leaky gut, or we can call it gut dysbiosis, you can call it GAP syndrome, which is gut and psychology syndrome. There's a lot of names for this. Intestinal permeability is another common name you'll hear. It may mean that you have digestive issues. It doesn't always mean that. Some people have a very high inflammation, they have a leaky gut, and they don't have gut pain, but a lot of people do, okay? But whether you do or not, inflammation, and again, all health begins in the gut. So let's see. And this happens even at birth with the way that children are born through C-section. They're not getting the proper flora into their gut, in their GI tract. So they're compromised from birth, children that are born via C-section. Okay. And then we give them antibiotics and birth control pills and other drugs and lots of stress and poor diet and more infections and bottle feeding. All these things add up to damage the gut flora. Okay. Not to mention the foods that damage the gut flora. Okay. So we have the main culprit is probably not only sugar, but also refined vegetable oils and seed oils. Okay. And also, of course, all the carbohydrates. So carbs, excess carbohydrate consumption comes from sugar, grains, seeds, nuts, honey, fruit, and vegetables. So even the healthy things can be overloaded. So what happens when we're solely running on glucose all the time? So we have sort of two operating systems going on in our metabolism. One is glucose metabolism, which fuels us. But the other one is something that nobody talks about. And it's actually the preferred way that humans produce energy, which is through the process of ketogenesis, or nutritional ketosis, or a ketogenic diet, whatever you want to call it. But it's when the body is actually using fat to fuel itself as opposed to sugar or glucose or carbohydrates. Okay, those are all sort of the same for the sake of this conversation. So when you're fueling with carbs all the time, it's kind of like it just burns out the machine, because our body, as we evolved, was designed to go back and forth between these two ways of producing energy. So again, there's glucose, which people think, well, you have to have glucose because your brain needs glucose or you'll die. But that's not actually true. Your body doesn't need any carbs. So carbohydrates are not even an essential nutrient, which is pretty shocking to some people. Again, we think back to the food pyramid, which looks a lot like this slide, which is full of these types of foods that we're all supposed to be eating mostly, right? But carbohydrates are the only nutrient that are non-essential. So your body does not need any glucose at all to survive and thrive. And in that state, when the glucose comes down and the insulin comes down, your body starts to look for that next fuel source in line, which is actually fat. And so we are well designed to burn fat as a fuel source, but just we weren't taught how, and we weren't taught the importance of it. But when you look back to our human evolution, we have this adaptation because most of the time we were burning fat, not carbohydrates. It was very rare in the Paleolithic times where you would come across a berry patch, maybe in the woods, or maybe a honeycomb, but that was very rare. So if you can imagine, pre-agriculture, mostly what we ate was animals that we hunted, right? And maybe we dug up some tubers and things like that in times of starvation. But the predominant food source that we ate came from hunting. And we gathered sometimes, but in season. So it was maybe a couple times a year that we actually had to go and burn some sugar for fuel. But most of the time we were burning fat all the time. And it's actually the preferred fuel source for our brain and all of our cells, but particularly the brain, which is why a ketogenic diet has such a profound impact on people with cognitive issues, mental illness, and also Alzheimer's, dementia, and seizures, right? So this was basically the first diet that was ever medically recognized as a treatment for seizures, right? Was the ketogenic diet, because it helps to calm down the brain chemistry in such a profound way that it actually prevents and can treat seizures. That sometimes,
and autism as well.
Yes, and autism as well.
Yeah. When we put Jordan, my son, on a fully GAPS diet and a ton of probiotics, we watched him morph before our eyes. We had never seen such a shift and change in his pathology.
That is so beautiful. I love hearing that. Yeah, and it happens so quickly. Okay, so again, back to the other inflammatory foods that we eat. Not only glucose, because glucose stimulates insulin, and insulin is a major inflammatory hormone in the body. So if you have inflammation, you have too much insulin. Okay, but the other culprit is these seed oils that we've all been told to eat because it'll bring down our cholesterol and our, make our LDLs go down and all the things, right? So we have been, again, sold a picture that is going to be motivated by profit and has nothing to do with human health. In fact, the one thing that has gone up 1,000% in the last 100 years is seed oil consumption. People call them vegetable oils, I think maybe just to make them sound healthy, but they're really from seeds, right? So this is cotton seeds, corn is a seed, right? Peanut oil is made from, all of these plants are seeds of plants. So they're not really coming from vegetables. They're not squeezing a zucchini or corn and getting these, right? It's the seed of the plant. So just know that there's nomenclatures that have been invented to sort of hook us into this belief system that these are healthy things. But these are incredibly inflammatory because they're incredibly, they are vulnerable. The chemical structure of these processed oils are very volatile. So they're highly oxidative. And that means that they go into your body and they oxidate your cells. It's basically like why we need antioxidants is to combat oxidation of the cells. And this, more than anything, is driving oxidation of the cells. So if you only learn one thing today, it would be to cut seed oils out of your diet completely, 100%. Okay.
Yeah, and that means restaurants as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do they use to fry everything?
Everything. And of course, deep fried foods are the worst because they're literally dripping in these toxic oils. Okay. I'll talk more about these oils in a little bit, but they're highly processed. They're oxidative. They're loaded with free radicals and they cause massive amounts of cellular damage. Okay. Particularly liver fat, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is directly linked to these oils going into our cells and trying to sort of mesh with them like a normal fat would become part of our cell wall and part of our organs and part of our brain. Well, they go there, but they actually can't do the job of a real fat, a healthy fat, a natural fat, okay? Because our body doesn't quite understand them. So they go there to, say, the cell wall or the brain or the nervous system, but they don't perform the same function. They don't perform the same level of protection. And it can take up to 3 years to actually give your body an oil change and get these toxic chemicals out of the body. So it takes quite a long detox process to get these out, but you can do it. You can give your body an oil change, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so the other thing that's very inflammatory is what we put into our gut are known as anti-nutrients. Okay, these are things like gluten and phytates and tannins and oxalates and saponins. These are just plant compounds that are poisonous. Okay, and all plants have plant poisons. All plants are poisonous. Some are more poisonous than others. Okay, so the very first thing, if you have a gut issue, is to cut out toxic plants. Okay, that will calm down the gut. It will help it to heal and repair itself. And that's the beginning really of opening the doorway to healing the metabolism, okay, is to get the gut situated without inflammatory toxins going in, okay? So excess anti-nutrients, which are these plant chemicals, they create a leaky gut, which again, the toxins leak out into the bloodstream. They cause the immune system to come into play to get rid of these things. And ultimately, the immune system can't possibly deal with all of the toxins, because if you're eating these things with every meal, like a lot of people are, there's no way the immune system can handle it. So they go in and they get into the bloodstream and they end up attaching, because toxins are lipophilic. So they love fat. So these toxins like to attach to your joints, to your nervous system, to your brain, and to your organs. Okay. And particularly the thyroid, for example, and maybe even the prostate, or other parts of the immune system that are filters to get rid of these toxins, are commonly infected or infested with these toxic particles. And so then what happens when the body just cannot deal with the onslaught of toxins with every bite? It turns against itself. Okay. And that's when we end up with an autoimmune condition. And it's not a bad thing. It's actually the body's way of trying to get rid of those toxins that have accumulated in the body. Okay. So that's when we have a full-blown autoimmune issue, right? So if you have a collection of toxins in your thyroid, for example, your body may turn against itself to try to get rid of the thyroid, because it's trying to get rid of those toxins that have accumulated there. Okay. So an autoimmune condition is a light bulb that should go off, that should say, what is going on that's creating the body trying to get rid of something that is useful, right? And it's very enlightening when you begin to look at things this way.
Yeah, well said. And we have served so many women with thyroid conditions. It is epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely epidemic. And they'll say, oh, I'm eating really clean. I had oatmeal for breakfast. I had a shake for lunch. I have this, protein powder that I'm taking. And, it's all in a shake. And I have some nice juice in there and lots of vegetables and celery. Celery's good, right? And, and then, like some soup or chicken at supper. And that's kind of exactly the food guide. And we all think that we're eating really healthfully. But
right.
You're right. Why is it that thyroids and obesity and diabetes is just off the charts?
Right. And all the other organ damaging diagnoses you can come up with, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and dementia and, the list just goes on and on.
Migraines for leaky brain.
That's right.
It just keeps, going on and on.
And also mental illness. So mental illness is inflammation in the brain. Okay. It starts with inflammation in the gut. So if you want to address mental illness head on, just like Dr. Natasha Campbell talks about in her book, Gut and Psychology Syndrome, you deal with directly going after the leaky gut. Okay. And this has been so profoundly useful for so many thousands of people to do this. And I've seen it in my practice and with, a lot of other people that are doing this. So
yeah, we've had patients reverse Alzheimer's and dementia just from removing all those sugar and carbs out of their diet. And it's shocking.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Okay, so plants, I want you to know this is also very counterintuitive. They have these anti-nutrients, which are plant toxins. And although this looks like a beautiful, lovely salad, for some people, this is going to be highly inflammatory. Okay. So that's all I want to say about that. So I'll skip over that. Yeah. Okay. So intestinal permeability, once we have leaky gut, we have systemic toxicity. Our body starts to produce cytokines. These cross the blood-brain barrier. Then we then have brain inflammation. And again, mental illness occurs. So intestinal permeability is the epicenter of systemic inflammation. Again, if you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky brain. Okay, so we've been told, and this is how even in medical school, they're still teaching this, that the body is kind of like a sink, right? So you eat things and calories go in and calories go out, and that's it. So this is the extent of nutritional education that our doctors are getting. And yeah, so this is not actually the true reality of the situation, because we are not built like a sink. There's something called insulin that acts like the drain stopper. And what we don't consider in this model is the profound effect that hormones have in what happens to the food once it gets in the sink. Okay. So I'm just going to go over this really quick. So the two compartment model is more like this. So you have food that goes in, and what isn't being used gets stored for later. It's particularly if you have a lot of carbohydrates coming in, it gets stored as fat. So this energy coming in that can't be used right away has to go somewhere. So you can imagine that it's going down in the basement in the deep freezer. Okay, this is what happens when we start to gain fat on our body, is that we have carbohydrates that trigger insulin, and insulin basically just tells your body to store fat. Okay, insulin is so important, and it's literally every single cell has a receptor for insulin on it in the human body. So it's a very prevalent hormone, and it's very useful for so many things. And one of the things it does is it pushes glucose into the cell so that you have energy to use. But if there's not enough room for more glucose to get in, and there's still glucose coming in, it gets stored as fat. So it's a one-way street. Fat doesn't necessarily turn back into glucose. It never goes the other way. So that's another little kind of tricky little thing. But so if you're gaining body weight, if you're gaining body fat that's unwanted, the first thing to do is to be more mindful of the amount of glucose and carbohydrates that you're putting in, period. And at some point, there's something called a ketogenic diet, which we mentioned a little bit before, which is very, very much an extreme low carbohydrate diet. So a lot of people are talking about ketosis as you'll see it in the media, you see it around, it's becoming more popular. And it's because there's such a huge amount of medical literature now and scientific evidence to suggest that this is actually a mechanism that we want to trigger in our body, because it's very detoxifying and it's very healthy. And our body was actually built to do this, but most people have been running on glucose their whole life. Okay. So now that we're starting to realize, wow, this has some major health benefits, and it can help people lose weight, reverse diabetes, reverse autoimmunity, reverse leaky gut. I mean, it can really, what we're seeing is that you can reverse chronic disease by changing your diet in this profound way. But a ketogenic diet is sort of the outer extreme edge of a low carbohydrate diet. Okay. So you can be on a low carbohydrate diet and never be in ketosis or never be utilizing ketones for fuel. And what I typically help people do is learn how to trigger nutritional ketosis so that you are producing ketones for fuel instead of carbs. So what this does is it's sort of like a muscle, right? So you're building this metabolic muscle so that your machinery inside of your cells, the mitochondria that we talked about earlier, is actually able to utilize not just glucose, but also fat. And so that you have both of these engines always sort of going at the same time. And when there's not enough glucose, well, your body burns fat. And when there's some glucose that comes in, your body uses that first, always will use that first. And then it will go back to fat burning. And that's really how we were designed. And when we can eat according to our human design, we are going to reverse our disease processes, and we're going to have more energy, and we're going to feel so much better, and we're going to prevent chronic disease. Okay. But this is sort of part of that information that never got downloaded, right? So it's still sort of out in the ethers, but it's coming through slowly. And there is a lot of alternative practitioners that are talking about it, right? So it's becoming more popular, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I met you, Mary, I thought I was on a ketogenic diet. And so when you were brought over for dinner by our friend Anita with your husband, and we all sat around and talked, and, I was telling you a little bit about how I had loved keto for so many years. And you said, well, how many years have you been on the ketogenic diet? And I said, oh, probably about 20. And you said, what? Yeah. And because I had never eaten wheat, Jeff and I had not had bread in our house in 20 years. And, I was making almond flour, little sweet, like with monk fruit treats. And, my weight was not budging. And that's the thing, is that we were having shakes every day with tons of vegetables, big salads for dinner, eating probably 75% of our food intake was vegetables or nuts or seeds, and wondering why I just never could get my weight to budge until you said, oh yeah, we're going to fix this. And I was a bit nervous about what that was going to look like. And so you kept backing me out of this corner with all of these vegetables and, not so much fruits because I was only eating berries, but all the seeds. And by backing out of that corner, I was able to drop 30 pounds in the last 4 or 5 months. And so imagine my surprise that I eat nothing but fish, eggs, beef, organ meat. And that's pretty much it. And so, yeah, I became this fat burning, clear minded organism that I really didn't know that the seeds and vegetables were causing such havoc in my system, insulin resistance. Who, even in the health field, knows that?
Yeah. And you were so open to just whatever it was going to take. And that is such a huge part of this, because sometimes when I tell people you have to cut out plants, you can't heal this unless you cut out plants. They just can't wrap their head around it, and they won't let that in, and they won't believe that. And so they don't do it, and they don't get the results, right? So those plants are although many of them are low carb, they also are very inflammatory, many of these plants. So the chocolate and the green smoothies and the kale and the chard and those things can be highly inflammatory for many, many people. So sometimes that's just the last little trick that has to be implemented before people really start letting go of extra body fat. And if you have extra body fat that you're carrying around, it's kind of like this gasoline truck here in this slide that runs out of gas. So imagine if you have all this fuel that you're carrying around, but you don't have access to it, and you actually run out of gas on the side of the road. That's what it's like when an overweight person is trying to lose weight, essentially, because you'll never tap into this fat storage on the back of the truck without shifting your metabolism into ketosis. Okay.
Yeah. And
so
this is key. This is absolutely key. And this is, having an advanced copy of your book, which comes out May 11th. And we're going to get to that for sure, because people need to know where to access this information. That, I think, was the biggest takeaway for me, is that you're never going to get to that layer if you don't eliminate every carbohydrate out of your diet. It's like an elimination diet for allergies. And then we can see, maybe a vegetable, you can have some, the low glycemic index zucchini. Mm-hmm. And see how that reacts. And this is what you've done with me. Well, maybe a bit of whole fat cream, you can see how you react to that, and I'm extremely sensitive. And patients I have served have been extremely sensitive. And it's been a real mystery around, what we've been told, even in the health field, what's super, healthy is not serving some of us individuals, and I have patients I serve that you just, put them on a higher fat diet and low glycemic vegetables, boom, they're losing weight like crazy, and they do great. But no, I was one of your most difficult and special clients.
Indeed, but so willing, so willing. I love that about working with you, Allie. Yeah. But she would say, but wait, aren't I supposed to be eating these things? And I thought, well, you might think so, but we've all been taught to believe that these foods are healthy, and many of them just are not for some people. So, okay. So what happens when we eat glucose? We get a rise in the blood sugar. We get this surge of insulin that comes out of the pancreas, okay? And then our blood sugar sort of crashes, right? And when we crash, we get this stress response gets kicked off, right? Our body sends off cortisol and epinephrine. And it's, we might have a little racy heart rate. We might get a headache. We might feel hungry. All these hunger symptoms happen. Okay. And so the way to get rid of this spike and crash of the blood sugar is really just to prevent that spike from happening in the first place. Okay. Because what we want to do is enter into this healthy adrenal area where we're not constantly on this blood sugar roller coaster going up and down all day, which is very unhealthy. Okay. Insulin resistance is when we have a constantly elevated which is what happens when we eat the typical American diet and we have snacks in between meals, right? So we eat 3 meals a day, we have 3 snacks, we're eating 6 times a day. Our blood sugar is always high, right? And it's constantly on this roller coaster. So you get hungry, you have another snack or another whatever, another donut or bagel, and back up it goes. So we're just constantly doing this all day, and it's very taxing on the adrenals and on the hormone system. So when we bring all that down back into balance, our metabolism gets to come into alignment and balance, and it gets to relax. And when that happens, our brain gets to relax and our whole body gets to relax. And it's in that relaxed state that we have the most maximized healing take place. Okay. So when your blood sugar crashes, you want to resist it ever crashing down low enough to have this surge of stress hormones. Okay. When your body has stress hormones in it circulating as if there's an emergency, it's going to look for whatever it is that's going on in your environment that's causing this stress response. And so oftentimes that leads our mind down lots of rabbit holes to look for reasons why we should feel anxious and stressed. And the mind will always find what it's looking for. Okay. So this is one way to stop that whole cycle, is just to get your blood sugar into balance. Okay. So simple. And when we do that, our whole immune system can relax and we can start doing the healing that's needed, because your body is wired first and foremost for safety. So when your cortisol spikes, it's literally telling your body that there's something in your environment that you should be worried about, that there's a reason to be in this state of stress. So until we get this handled, your body can't really fully engage in the healing process because it's worried about keeping you safe. Essentially, it's much more important to fight a saber-toothed tiger than it is to fight a virus. Okay, the first thing in alignment, in line for the body, is always your safety. Okay, so the idea to maximize healing is to relax your nervous system, get your stress hormones under control, and that's all coming from the top down based on what you're eating. Okay, and then of course there's the mind that can also go and create its own stress by the things it's thinking about. But I also talk about that in my book, and how to really work with your mind so that you can more accurately interpret its messages and know what is your true self speaking and what is just your mind chatter. Okay, so there's a big distinction there that I walk people through in the beginning of the book. So that you won't always be in these triggered loops of stress in your mind, thinking about, oh my God, I have to pay the bill. And oh my God, I have to go to the store, and I have to pick up the kids from school, and all the things that we think about. So how can you kind of compartmentalize that and put it into a corner so that you can function and not have your body constantly being in this stress state? Okay, super important. So how do we come to this balanced state? We stop this carbohydrate spike. Okay, so carbohydrates cause this big sharp spike. Okay, protein, as you can see, doesn't really affect the blood sugar nearly as much as carbohydrates do. And fat, if you'll notice, has virtually zero impact on the blood sugar. So super important. If you're going to have a low carbohydrate diet, which I highly recommend for everybody, ketogenic diet, that's sort of for the more extreme person that really wants to deal with some deep level chronic illness and that kind of thing, maybe cancer, autoimmunity, obesity, diabetes, things like that. But for most humans, a low carbohydrate diet is optimal. Okay. And to do that, you have to either increase protein or fat, because there's only 3 macronutrients. Okay. So you can't have a low carb diet and not have an increase in either protein or fat. So again, this is not new information. If you want more about the fantastic benefits of actually burning fat for fuel, I highly recommend this book from Dr. Mercola, Fat for Fuel. It's amazing. And then these books are not new. Mark Hyman wrote this book many years ago, but and there's so many books written about this very same thing. But you're not going to hear about this from your doctor's office, from the top down. We're not going to hear this information from the media, from the doctor's office, from the hospital, from the surgeon. From most traditionally trained medical professionals, we are not going to know about this. But the doctors that have done the research and they have looked at the scientific literature, they're writing books, and you can read their books. So that's the good news, is that this, again, is not new information, but it's not allowed out so people don't know about it. Okay. So that's why I'm really excited you're listening to this, because you're getting a little bit of new but old information that can save your life, really. Okay. So one way to burn off glucose is to fast, right? Fasting is one of the oldest strategies in the world for creating spiritual connection. Most every major religion uses fasting certain times of the year to create a stronger connection with spirit. It's also one of the oldest healing modalities in the world. So why is that? Maybe because it brings your glucose down and it kicks you into ketosis, which gives you more mental clarity and more of a ability to connect with source or spirit or God, whatever you want to say, which is probably why major religions use this. So people that fast a couple times a year, that's a wonderful practice. And what that does is it causes your body to start producing ketones and using those ketones from your body fat as a fuel source. Okay. Here is a traditional 3 meals a day, right? So the red is when we eat some carbs and our blood sugar goes up. And then the green is just a little bit where we start to dip into more of a fat burning stage. Okay. Mostly this happens at night when we're sleeping. And if you want to maximize this, you can reduce your carbohydrates so your spikes aren't as peaked here. They're not as steep. And then the lower end won't be as steep either. So you can change this up by doing more fasting and less eating time during the day when you're eating. Okay. We would call this, this would be a 12-hour eating window, right? Most people are doing that. Most people, maybe even a longer eating window. But if you just change that up just a little bit, this is what can happen. You can end up spending more time burning fat. You pinch that eating window into a shorter window of time. Very simple. If I would say if the whole world just did this, we would have a lot less chronic health problems. Okay, just by doing this, just by changing the time at which you eat your food during the day. Most people, evolutionarily speaking, we probably ate 1 meal a day. There was a hunt, there was an animal. We ate as much as we could until maybe the next day. Okay, that's it. We ate once a day. And when you do that, this is what can happen. You have a lot more time when you're burning fat and a lot less time when your body is burning insulin or burning glucose. Okay. And so you can play with this. This is just a simple thing you can do because your fat has to come from somewhere. If you're fat burning, it's either going to come from your diet or it's going to come from your body, what you have stored. And it'll probably just go back and forth. So once you kind of get into this rhythm, you're really very efficient at burning fat. And that's a really, really healthy thing. Okay. So again, the idea here is that we want to find a resting place with the mind, with the blood sugar, with the gut flora, and through deep nourishment and connecting with the elements. And this is, I think, the last slide maybe, but my book is coming out May 11th, just next week. So that's very exciting. And it'll be available for just $1.99 on Amazon for only 24 hours. So I really want you to take advantage of this opportunity because I want to get this into the hands of as many people as possible. And you'll get it at a special rate of $1.99 for just that one 24-hour period. So I do have a link. You can find me at ketogenicdietcoach.com. And on that homepage, you'll see a link to get on my mailing list. And what I'll do on May 11th is I'm going to send you a link where you can actually go to download my book. And I don't have that link yet, but I will send it to you first thing May 11th in the morning. So you'll have an opportunity to go and do that if you choose. So thank you so much for listening. And I'd love to take any questions that people may have.
And for people who are watching with us live right now, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or some of the other platforms watching us, you can just type your comment under the video, right, the way you normally comment on social media, and we will see it here in our panel. Or, there's no or. That's the main way, really, to send a comment. Yeah. And actually, and I will put in the first question. There was someone who forwarded a question to me a couple of days ago in anticipation of today. And the essence of her question was about, my mind just went blank on the word I'm supposed to say.
Acid? Was it?
No, it has to do with there's a lot of meat in the diet. It creates a certain byproduct. And I've completely lost that word at the moment.
Was it? I think it was uric acid.
Oh, it could be. It could be. Yeah.
Acidosis, uric acid.
Let
I'll
me.
find it.
I will
think-
find the original question here. Give me half a second.
Yeah. So you find the question. I have another question in the interim.
Okay.
So Mary, you and I are going to go out for dinner together.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to stick to my keto approach. What am I going to do when I get to the restaurant with you?
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, what I always like to do is look at the menu and start asking questions. So the best thing to do is always ask a lot of questions about how things are cooked.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have the safest route to go is to have some type of animal meat, animal protein, maybe a steak, a piece of fish, ribs, anything, a burger, even burger patty. So if you go with getting your protein needs met, right, which that's a whole nother conversation. But if you aim for protein and then add some fat to it, you're pretty safe. Or you could also have vegetables if you're doing vegetables. Or like a broth, I would say. But your safest bet is like animal protein and animal fats. Always, always, always the go-to thing. Yeah. So make sure you check how things are cooked. If it's deep fried, it's off the table. No, that's a no-go. If it's pan fried, that's great, but you want to know what they're putting in the pan, and you can always request butter.
Yes.
That's what I always do. And grilled is probably the safest because there's nothing potentially that's going to be in that pan other than, what you're getting on your plate. So that's kind of the way I like to start is look at the main entrees and look at the protein, and then you can get it without, a la carte or on some low carb vegetables, on a bed of greens, or that would be my advice to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. One of my favorite things to do is to go and get a really nice smoked salmon platter that we share together. And then, like he said, let's share a steak, because I also have to watch my portions. And so there seems to be kind of like two things in my realm that are my responsibility is the way my food is cooked, what I'm eating, but also how much I'm eating.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So we do have this, this model of that calories go in and they go out. But what happens when you reduce your calories, which is a non-sustainable way that we've all been taught to lose weight, is to exercise more and to not eat as much. And what happens when we do that is we become voraciously hungry, and it's not sustainable. So anybody who's ever exercised more and eaten less calories knows how miserable that is, how unsustainable that is. And that's why people in the Biggest Losers, the whatever that movie, the series there, where people lose a lot of weight and then most of them gain it back and then some, because they've been in this restricted state for so long where they haven't had access to their own body fat. So when again you bring that glucose level down and your body has access to your body fat stores, you have access to an unlimited supply of energy, which is the amazing thing about how you can lose weight so easily with the low carb ketogenic diet, because you don't feel hungry, you're not suffering. If you work out, that's great. It's a benefit. It's certainly a wonderful benefit, but it's not a weight loss requirement. And that's something that we have not been taught as medical professionals, or as people generally speaking don't know that. And so weight loss becomes this daunting, impossible task, when really, if you can just let your metabolism do the hard work for you, you'll burn body fat while you're sleeping. And that's the beautiful part about this whole process. So
yeah, and boiled eggs are your friend, just so you know.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Did you find that question, hun?
I did. Actually, she sent it in to clarify for us, and actually she put in an additional question. So here we are.
Can you comment about impact on hormones? And yes, it was uric acid.
Oh, okay. Is that two separate questions?
Yes.
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 Okay. So I'm going to talk about the uric acid. So the impact on hormones when you eat this way is that it helps to balance your hormones. So if you look at like a mobile that's hanging above the baby bassinet and you pull on just one string, the whole thing is going to be affected, right? And that's kind of the way what happens when we have chronically elevated levels of insulin. Our whole entire system is out of balance. We're heavy on the insulin, so the other hormones, if you pull on this string, they're going to be going up. The hormone, the amount of insulin is going to be increased, and then the amount of the other hormones that your body is producing are going to also be affected. So if we can bring that into balance, all the hormones will be affected in a positive way. And I would like to think that our body is perfectly capable of having all of our hormones come into a beautiful balance when we stop pulling on that insulin string in the mobile. So that's how it can help with hormones. Insulin is a hormone. If your hormones are out of balance, the very first place to look is how can you get your insulin under control? Because that's usually the one thing you do have control over, right? You can't really necessarily impact your testosterone immediately, but you can impact your glucose immediately, okay? You can also impact your testosterone, but well, that'll be a separate conversation. Okay, so I'm seeing another question here. What are the most popular and toxic plants? So the most popular, especially in the low carb world, and the world that I've lived in for many years, are my favorite foods that I don't eat anymore, are chocolate, even 100% raw cacao. Cacao is a bean. It's a seed of a plant, right? So it's going to have a lot of plant toxins on it because of the way that it's processed and just the nature of a seed that it has a lot of toxins. Seeds need to go through a lot of work to get to sprout. So they're very protected. They have lots of phytic acid and other tannins and things that are coating them so that they don't sprout until the environment is perfectly right. So they can make it through the digestive tract, through all the stomach acid and the digestive enzymes and all of the gut bacteria, and all the way out through the body of a human or an animal till it's put on the ground. And then it sits in harsh conditions, rain and sun and wind, until just the right temperature and just the right water and just the right everything, and then it'll sprout. So seeds don't want to be eaten. They don't want to be digested, essentially. They want to be taken in, and they want to stay intact until they can get out of the body that ate them, and so they can sprout. That's how they survive. So they have a lot of these toxins on them. So chocolate is one of those very toxic plants. And I used to eat it all the time. So I had to cut that out, okay? And then some of the other sort of more toxic green plants are spinach, very high in oxalates. If anybody has joint pain or painful urination, painful bladder, any kind of nerve pain, it affects your eyesight. I mean, they just lodge in your joints, your tendons, your cartilage, your nerves, and even autoimmunity. They're huge triggers for that. So these would be the very green leafy things that we have sort of modified to become what they are, right? So the broccoli, the cauliflower, the chard, and the kale. These were all at one point very small wild plants that lived in the wild, right? But we've sort of selectively chosen to make them bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So they're all sort of part of the same family, and they all have these toxins. So I would say even they all plants have toxins. That's all I want to leave you with. But some of the worst culprits are spinach, chard, kale, chocolate. I would say probably wheatgrass. And a lot of other green grassy things, and seeds and nuts. So seeds and nuts are really, really hard on the gut, and they're loaded with oxalates. So you might think that eating almond flour muffins is a good alternative to, the low carb, whatever. But for some people, that just is it's an inflammatory mess when they eat those things. So so those would be probably some of the most toxic plants. Some of the least toxic would be fruits, because fruits actually want to be eaten. Fruits appeal to the taste and the vision to say, come and eat me. That's how my seed is going to get move on to the next generation, right? So fruits are less toxic than seeds and nuts, because seeds and nuts don't want to be eaten. Fruits, not so much. But fruits with seeds, like strawberries, have a lot of seeds on the outside. Sometimes those can be really reactive to people as well. So the lower toxicity vegetables, though, I would say cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, and asparagus. Those are some of the lower toxic plants. Okay.
It brings to mind the question, does the bear poop in the woods? Yeah, because that's how they reseed the strawberries and the raspberries and blueberries.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So when I first heard that I should be eating organ meat, my first reaction was something I had been told by individuals in my family, is that organs are the collectors of toxins in the bodies of the animal. Like the liver is processing the blood and any toxicity. And then, so speak to that, if you will, because people ask me about this.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the liver, for example, these are like the filtration systems of the body, right? The kidneys, the liver, the lymph nodes, everything. All the organs really are filtration systems. So the liver, though, in particular, think of it like a machine that is a filter, right? So it's not collecting toxins. It's actually filtering the toxins out and getting rid of them, okay? So that's the function of the liver. So it's not harboring the toxins. It's actually getting them to be excreted from the body. So don't think of the organ as a storehouse of toxins. Think of it more as the machine that actually does the filtration. And they're incredibly nutrient dense because they're doing a lot of work, right? So the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, all of these are very highly nutritious. So you don't need a lot of them, but to have some of them once in a while is a really good practice, because you're going to replenish the lost nutrients. The other thing that anti-nutrients do is they bind to nutrients and they excrete them from the body. That's a pretty important point to remember. So for example, oxalates, they will go in, and if you eat, so spinach is very high in oxalates. And we think that if we eat spinach, it's going to make us strong like Popeye or whatever the cartoon said. But the truth is that spinach actually depletes calcium from your body. It binds to your bones. It binds to your joints. It causes tremendous joint pain. It actually looks like a little tiny piece of broken glass under the microscope. So they're very jagged, and they lodge in your joints, in your organs, and your nerves, and they just wreak havoc. They actually can just pierce right through the gut lining. So anti-nutrients pull nutrients out of your body. So if you have osteoporosis, osteopenia, any of these kind of things, you definitely want to be really sure that you're not over consuming plants that are high in oxalates and other anti-nutrients, because they're stripping the nutrients out of your body. That's why they call them anti-nutrients, actually.
Sarah has a question. She wants to know what your advice is on fermented foods.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of fermented foods. Yeah, kefir, just fermented raw milk, or sauerkraut. I think those are wonderful ways to get more probiotics into the body. And cabbage is a fairly benign vegetable. So some people may not be able to tolerate it, but most people can. And it's a great way, even if you just drink the cabbage or the sauerkraut juice, it's a great way to get probiotics in. So yeah, I love fermented foods and kombucha and all that kind of stuff. So.
All right. I have one last question for you, and then I want to put your book back up on the screen again so people know where and how to order it. Okay. And my last question is, we probably had 1,400 vegetarians faint during the talk today. And so people want to know, like, is this a sustainable way of eating? Are we not harming the environment? And, one of your beautiful slides in the beginning, or when I introduced you, was actually that you are very much about sustainable and rejuvenating agriculture. So talk first about how the vegetarian diet, and I know this is a big topic, but if you could just touch down and reassure people that it actually has been a problem for quite some time, that I and Jeff have treated a lot of vegetarian people who have actually been stuttering with their health in huge ways until they come back and start eating meat again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if you go back and look at, for example, the slide with the evolving man and the guy with the Coke, when we evolved as humans, our genetic programming is such that we evolved eating animals, ruminant giant animals, bison, mammoths, whatever, you name it, for millions and millions of years. So our body is completely adapted to these foods. And if you do, say, an allergy test, when you test different foods, you will never have meat come up on an allergy test because there's no human that's allergic to meat. It just doesn't happen. And we've been all taught to eat more plants, and that animals are ruining the planet and that we have to eat more and more plants. And over the last 100 years, if you look at the food pyramid, the thing that has changed in the last probably 10,000 years, it's certainly in the last 100 years, is the increase in plant consumption. So according to the food pyramid, we've been told to eat more seeds, more nuts, more grains, more bread, more pasta, more cereal, and essentially more processed food too, but more plants and also more seed oils. So with the addition of plants and seed oils, we now have the outcome of the largest human experiment on the planet, which is 80% of the population being metabolically dysfunctional. And if we look beyond that, what we did for thousands and thousands, if not millions of years before, there was no chronic disease. So not only are humans completely and perfectly designed to metabolize meat, we don't have a forestomach like animals that eat plants all day, like a koala bear or a cow, for example. They have what's called a forestomach that can use fermentation to digest these plants. These animals eat only one thing. They eat grass or they eat eucalyptus leaves if you're a panda, right? These are highly specialized digestive tracts that have been made just to eat that one thing. We were not made that way. We were not made to eat grass. We are not a grass-eating animal. If we did that, which a lot of people are essentially eating a lot of grass because they're eating a lot of plants, we become obese. We have a lot of inflammation and our immune system starts to fail. So that's what happens when we overconsume these things. And again, I would just say that for all the vegans and vegetarians out there, you don't necessarily need to do anything different, but if you're thriving and if you're healthy and if you don't have any, if you're exactly where you want to be, then you shouldn't do anything different. But if you're feeling like there's something missing, then know that your body knows what to do with animal protein, and it was perfectly designed on a genetic level to utilize protein as a perfect animal protein as a perfect fuel source for the body, for repair and for growth and for all of the things that we use protein for. Most of our body is made of protein. Most every cell in our body. We don't store carbohydrate in our body, but our body is made of protein. It's made of fat. So we respond when we put that in, and that's what repairs our damaged body parts, is those things. You'll never get collagen from eating plants. It doesn't exist in a plant. So if you want to repair your gut and your joints and your bones, that collagen has to come from another source of collagen, which goes in and then does that repair and that restoration. So it is a difficult hurdle to overcome. I understand if that's your belief, and it might take some time, but if you feel poorly enough, then that's usually the catalyst to doing something that's completely outside of our comfort zone. And I just invite everybody to really challenge their belief system around what they eat, and see where do those beliefs come from, and are they really coming from what you believe is going to work for your body, or is it coming from something you heard out there in the world? But there was one other thing I wanted to say about agriculture. So animals, ruminant grass-eating animals, roamed on the planet for millions of years, and the planet was perfectly fine. So what we have is a huge amount of space that is uninhabitable, or there's no way to use that for growing crops. but animals can certainly thrive on it. So the amount of farmland that we have to actually feed animals in a natural habitat, so they're not confined in any way. They're free range animals. They're grass fed, they're grass finished. They are never confined in any way, and they don't eat anything other than what their digestive tract was designed to eat. So again, grass fed animals, grass finished animals raised in a regenerative fashion is the only recommendation that I have for everybody to try to find a local farmer, contact the Weston Price Foundation, go to a farmer's market, meet your neighbor on the outside of town, if that's a farm, whatever you have to do to ensure that you have a clean supply of protein and fat from animals is very, very, very important. So there is no agriculture without animal agriculture. The only way to grow plants is to be able to fertilize them with something other, hopefully, than toxic chemical fertilizers. So we have to have these animals. There's no way humans can ever live without being in community and in communion with animals. So anyway.
Well said. Somebody's going to ask me, isn't my cholesterol going to go off the charts as a result of eating, butter and fats and all the rest of it? And what we know is that the allopathic system of medicine has us believing for a long time that a raise in HDL is a harmful thing. When what we know is a raise in cholesterol of any sort, LDL or HDL, often is in answer to sugar and carbohydrates, and it's actually raising to protect the heart, right? And that's a desirable thing. And then you give somebody Lipitor or a drug which lowers it way down and causes the person to be more susceptible actually to heart attacks. And so, is your take the same as what ours is in that regard?
Yes. So that's a long story, but essentially your cholesterol isn't going to go through the roof. And if it does elevate, it's probably because it needs to. And the normal ranges that we have for people, again, the doctor, the media, big pharma, every step along the way is telling us that it's unhealthy to have high cholesterol or over a certain number. But the ranges that were created are based on an unhealthy population of people to begin with. And what you have to remember about cholesterol, LDLs, HDLs, and triglycerides is that it all is what medicine doesn't take into consideration is the context. So if you have a low carbohydrate diet and your LDLs are elevated, it's not a problem. But if you have an unhealthy diet, high in carbohydrates and refined seed oils, and you have oxidized LDLs, that's the thing you want to look at. Are your LDL particles oxidized or not? And if you're eating a low carbohydrate diet, your LDL and not having seed oils and other toxins, your LDLs are not oxidized, and therefore elevated LDLs are perfectly normal, right? But again, the messaging is to lower your LDLs, to lower your cholesterol, because we want up here to make money. It's all about keeping everybody in this range of lab results that is completely irrelevant, and it's based on profit motives, 100%.
Yeah. I still have one last question, and that is, how does somebody at home measure their blood glucose level and their ketones? And let's say they start working with you, how are they going to be on the full program with all of the bells and whistles from your Radical Health Makeover book? And give us the lowdown on that before we go.
Yeah, thanks, Allie. That's a great question. So there's a lot of things you can do. My goal is for you to take control of your health, so you don't need me anymore, right? So it's a runway, right? It's kind of a roadmap to how can you actually take your own health on, regardless of what your doctor or your neighbor or whatever media stream you're listening to is telling you, right? And the only way to do that is to take on some pretty specific practices. So you start to dialogue with your biochemistry. That's the way I like to talk about it. So when you engage in this conversation with your body, you can actually see how what you eat is affecting your blood sugar and your ketone production. And once you dial that down and you dial that in, you will be in control of your own health. You will be in control of your metabolism and your immune function and your hormones and everything else. But it does require a few little tools, and I walk you through this in my book and also in my courses, and whenever I work with people personally one-on-one, is that you set up your systems and you get your tools all in your tool belt so that you can intelligently engage in this conversation with your biochemistry. And so you know what foods you can and cannot eat. You will learn that through this process. And you will also learn how much of this can you eat before your blood sugar is out of range and out of the healthy range for you, right? So it's a fine tuning, and it starts with getting a few of these tools in place, which is a blood sugar meter, a ketone monitor, probably a scale, maybe a kitchen scale, and also tracking the food you eat. So you can see, oh, I ate this food and this is what happened. I ate this food and this is what happened. So you know, and you begin to learn intuitively how your body is reacting on a metabolic level. Nobody can tell you this, right? The closest thing you can get to knowing this, just going to your doctor's office, is to ask your doctor to please let you do a fasting insulin. Such a powerful test. This will give you a picture of your overall metabolic health. Also a hemoglobin A1C, or a HbA1C, they call it, right? Will give you basically like an overview of your blood sugar control and management over about the last 3 months. So this is a huge marker for metabolic health, as well as a fasting insulin. So we don't yet have a home test for insulin, but I think that's coming. There's somebody who's in the process of trying to create that. But right now, what we do have is a small little gadget that you can get for less than $100, and you have that in your hand so that you always will know how is your body responding to the food you eat, and what messages do you want to give your body so that it'll give you the results that you're wanting. If you're wanting to lose weight, but you're giving your body the message that it's supposed to be storing fat, you're never going to get the results you want. Okay. So anyway, you can find all this out on my website, and you can get on my list to get the link to download my book. And then also, my courses and programs and such, you'll see those as well on my website. But I did maybe want to just circle back to the uric acid question, yes, Allie, if I could, because anybody who's concerned about animal proteins increasing their level of acidity in the body, that would reflect in your uric acid profile. So if you're going to get labs and you look at your uric acid, you can see if it's elevated. But the thing that I want everyone to know is that the thing that elevates uric acid more than anything is fructose. Mm-hmm. So fruit juices and excess fruit is what triggers the production of uric acid. And uric acid also triggers fat storage. So there's two pathways. I've only talked about one. I've only been talking about the insulin fat storage pathway, but there's actually another one that actually Dr. Perlmutter just wrote a book called Drop Acid, and that's his whole book is about this. He's a neurologist. He's amazing. I love him. Anyways, his book is all about that uric acid pathway. And basically you can think of it like this. If you're a bear in the woods and you're getting ready to hibernate, you need to eat as much fruit as you can, and as much berries and whatever you can find in the way of sugar, carbohydrates in the wild, to put on a lot of fat quickly, okay? And so that you can make it through the winter and hibernate, and the fructose causes your body to store fat in a profound way. And so the bear is going to go into hibernation, stops eating completely, and then its body's going to flip over into ketosis, and it's going to burn its body fat while it's sleeping for a couple weeks or months, right? So essentially our body is similar to that in that we respond very quickly to the input of fructose, which triggers uric acid, which triggers fat storage. So the thing to watch out for is the fruit juices, high fructose corn syrup, sweetened beverages, and also just eating excess fruit. Okay. So that's all I wanted to say about the uric acid.
And you did a great job. Yeah, that polished everything off, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for listening and being patient and asking great questions. And I just really appreciate you, Jeff and Allie. Thank you so much.
Oh, Mary, it's been such a blast. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us and giving us a wealth of knowledge.
You're so welcome. Have a great day.
You too, hon.
Adios.
Adios.